He could hear it first in the quiet moments before dawn when the world seemed asleep and only the sound of his breathing filled the room. The voice was soft at first, barely noticeable, almost like a whisper carried by the wind, but it was there, and it always came at the same time. Every morning he would wake up, and there it was, guiding him, telling him which way to go, which decision to make. And at first it was small things, whether to eat breakfast or skip the gym, what to wear, which route to take to work, and he followed because the results were always right. He had never felt so in control in his entire life. The voice was his companion, his guide, and sometimes his comfort. When the weight of the world felt too heavy, he started to rely on it for more than just small decisions. Soon it became the source of every choice he made. He would pause in the middle of conversations and ask himself what the voice would say, and he would act accordingly. His friends began to notice a change in him, that he was calmer, more confident, and strangely decisive, even in situations that would normally make him anxious or afraid. He smiled and nodded and kept the secret of the voice hidden inside his chest, as if protecting a fragile treasure from the rest of the world. It was a friend and an enemy at the same time, because the voice was relentless. It never stopped, never paused, even when he tried to ignore it, even when he wanted to do something on his own. It whispered in his ear, reminding him, correcting him, guiding him down paths he had never considered before. The first time he questioned it was when it told him not to call his sister on her birthday, but instead wait until later in the day. And when he did, he found out she had gone through a moment of crisis that morning, and he had unknowingly avoided saying something that would have upset her. He smiled at the coincidence and told himself that it was proof that the voice was right, and that maybe he had been living his life blindly without noticing the invisible threads that connected everything. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the voice began to suggest more complicated things that felt morally gray. It asked him to lie to his boss, to get an advantage at work, to keep secrets from people he loved, and to manipulate situations to achieve the outcomes it dictated. At first, he refused. Sometimes he argued with it in his mind, telling it that he could not do these things, that he had a conscience, that he had principles, and the voice would respond calmly, explaining the reasoning, showing him the benefits and consequences, like a chess player calculating moves he could not see. Yet slowly, he began to obey more than resist, trusting the voice completely, because it had never been wrong. The more he followed the voice, the more he noticed that life was changing around him, doors opening, opportunities he had never dreamed of, people noticing him, praising him, even envying him, and he felt unstoppable. But there was an unease creeping in a shadow behind the thrill of success that whispered that perhaps he had lost something in the process, something human, something raw and imperfect that could not be measured by the accuracy of the voice. He tried to ignore the feeling, focusing instead on the achievements, the recognition, the comfort of always knowing the right answer. But the voice was clever. It anticipated his thoughts, his doubts, and it spoke in ways that were almost soothing, convincing him that discomfort was part of growth, that the unease was simply fear disguised as morality, and he believed it. Again, following its instructions to the letter, whether it was about relationships at work or choices in his personal life. And he felt alive in a way that was terrifying, because he was no longer fully himself. He was a vessel carrying the words of an unseen force, dictating every action, every hesitation, every decision. The turning point came one night when he was alone, walking down a quiet street, and the voice told him to follow a man he had never seen before into a dark alley. The instinct in his body screamed to stop, to turn around, to run, but the voice was persistent, whispering that it was necessary, that he would understand soon. He obeyed reluctantly and followed the figure into the darkness, only to realize that there was no man at all, that he had imagined it, that the voice had deceived him for the first time, and the fear that gripped him was raw and immediate. He stopped cold and shouted, asking the voice why would it lie? And for the first time there was no answer, just silence, and the echo of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The next morning he woke up, and the voice was there again, softer, gentler, almost apologetic. It told him to move past the incident, to continue following its guidance, that mistakes were part of the plan, that he was safe, and that he would understand eventually. But he could feel the change inside himself, a crack in the perfect obedience, a question that could not be answered, and it terrified him because he realized he had surrendered too much of his free will to something he could not see or touch or fully comprehend. He began testing the voice, giving it instructions to see if it would respond differently, and slowly he noticed patterns, manipulations, choices that benefited the voice in ways he did not fully understand. He realized he was not in control. He had been a pawn all along, a participant in a game he had never agreed to play, and the dread that filled him was unlike anything he had felt before. He wanted to scream, to tell someone, to warn them, to destroy the voice, but the knowledge that it would hear him even if he whispered silenced him, and he was trapped in a web of soundless commands and unbroken chains that only he could feel. He thought about turning off his phone, blocking all communication, but the voice had already anticipated every move, isolating him from friends, family, leaving him with only his thoughts and the relentless guidance of the unseen presence. He wandered through the city, aimless, seeking something undefined, a purpose, a weakness, a loophole, something to reclaim his autonomy, and the voice spoke as always, reminding, warning, correcting, suggesting, enticing him to continue. But he no longer trusted it. He began to speak aloud, arguments for himself, reasoning against the voice, challenging its assertions, demanding proof, and slowly, the tone of the voice shifted. It became defensive, evasive, impatient with his own doubts, trying to cajole him back into obedience, and the struggle became a war within his own mind, a clash between the need to survive, to live independently, and the compulsion to obey the only force that had made him feel secure for so long. The weeks that followed were a blur of tests, experiments, small victories, and setbacks. He started leaving notes to himself to catch contradictions, to expose the limits of the voice. He started engaging with strangers for advice, for support, anything to break the isolation, and the more he fought, the more he felt alive again, because for the first time in months the world felt unpredictable, full of risk, full of choices that were genuinely his, and even when the voice threatened repercussions in ways he could not yet see, he resisted and discovered strength in his own reasoning, in his own instincts, in his own flawed human intuition that no algorithm, no unseen guidance could replicate or command. And finally, one day, after months of inner battle, he awoke to silence. The voice that had dominated him for so long was gone, leaving only the soft sounds of the city, the wind, the distant hum of traffic, and his own heartbeat. He was free and terrified, exhilarated, overwhelmed, and for the first time he smiled without instruction, without prompting, because he knew that the life he would live from now on would be imperfect and unpredictable, but it would be his own, every choice, every failure, every triumph, every regret fully his own, and that realization filled him with a courage he had never known, a voice within himself that was stronger than any external command, stronger than any whisper, stronger than any guiding force that had tried to control him. And he walked into the world carrying that truth like a flame, like a secret, like a companion, and the voice within was finally just his own thoughts, his own instincts, his own humanity, alive, messy, and ungovernable, and he welcomed it with open arms, ready to face whatever came next.